Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Pete?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Goes around, comes around, I guess. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to share some thoughts today. Do I operate the projector from here? Is it? Okay. So what I'd like to do is share with the board a little bit about the budget outlook, where we're at, and where we might be headed. Talk a little bit about the planned work scope, and then some of the challenges and strategic changes that I think we'll be looking forward to in FY14. And I'll try and recover a couple of minutes on schedule here. Jeff did a great summary on some of the information I had, so I'm just going to briefly touch on that. We're still working through the framework agreement. As a reminder, that realigned our environmental priorities to more of a risk-based approach. And we've had 8 successful quarters of work on the 3706 campaign that Jeff described. So that's really become the cornerstone, I think, of how, an example of how we can perform if we have adequate funding and we have all the stars aligned. The impressive thing for me is the kind of the senior federal official overseeing it is all the facilities that Jeff and his team brought online and the volume increases that we've seen in the last 2 years in waste handling, processing, packaging, and shipping. And when you marry that up against the safety record that Jeff has shared, I think it's an excellent story. We couple that with the regulatory relationship with NMED. Secretary Flynn presented to the board a couple of meetings ago. We have alignment with the Environment Department on the goals, the risk-based cleanup. That vision is shared. NMED was a very strong advocate, as was the board and many others in this room, for a strong legacy cleanup budget for the laboratory. And that's allowed us to have the successes of dispositioning record volumes of waste and also helped with the expedited implementation of the chromium project that Jeff described. So it hasn't been easy, but we think we've balanced the framework agreement, the EPA individual permit, and the consent order work that we've done in FY13 to the best of our ability within a funding environment that could best be described as uncertain and at a funding level that was well below the executive budget that was proposed. So hats off to Jeff and his team. The 2014 budget outlook, again, if there's folks in the room that have more recent information or better insight than I do, I would not be offended in any way if they spoke up. The continuing resolution that's currently in place and through which we receive our funding expires on January 15th, 2014. That funding was at the FY13 appropriation level, and it did not incorporate the reprogramming efforts that we were successful in achieving in 13. And that's a big point because we received $19 million in EM reprogram dollars and $21 million in NNSA reprogramming dollars, and it was our hope that rolled together that $40 million would be reflected in the CR number that we had for 13, and unfortunately, for 14, and unfortunately that hasn't happened. So we're flagged at a level now that if you project it to an annual amount, it's 173, and we've been prorated for the first little more than a first quarter. I call it a first quarter, even though it's through January 15th, is because we were essentially shut down for the first 15 days of this fiscal year, of 50 million, a little over 50 million. So if you extrapolate and you multiply 50 million by 4, you say, Majori, you missed a couple of classes in high school and you need to go back because that comes closer to 20 million than 173. But you are absolutely correct. It's not going to be a linear burn rate. So the good news is we've got more money up front to help push the 3706 campaign. The challenge is we're going to have to maintain a spend plan that doesn't put us in a deficient status, and we're going to have to taper down later in the year. Now that's all at a 173 level. There is talk about the potential for an omnibus appropriations bill, possibly at the president's level, which was 220. But having just gone through the lapse in appropriation that started this fiscal year, I think it's prudent to plan for the worst and hope for the best rather than plan for the best and then get caught short. And that's what we're trying to do. So in FY14, we're going to continue to do our base groundwater compliance work. We're also going to be doing surface water protection work and the individual permit activities, which is included in their EPA permit. Continuing with our interim measures that Jeff described for chromium. And then the last bullet I wanted to spend just a minute on, it's a limited flood recovery. Has the board received a presentation or a briefing yet on the storms that happened up on the plateau in late September? That was pretty amazing. Jeff and I rolled out on that Friday morning and took a four-wheel drive and tried to get down to San Ildefonso Pueblo to look at E1099 gauging station, and it took us a while because every road that we took was closed. And so we got to firsthand see what those impacts were, and Jeff's team is still assessing that, but that's the damages, the infrastructure damages, the damages to the sampling systems, to the road infrastructures to get there is not trivial, and we're working on a prioritized basis and a risk basis to do some of that recovery work in FY14 as well. Jeff talked about the 3706 campaign, so I won't spend much time there. He also talked about beginning retrieval of CMPs and the below ground work, which was a comment. So I won't spend much time there either. Talk about program challenges. Our biggest is the potential for a lapse in appropriation, and I believe that Congress was going to try and get a budget put together mid-December, but I have not seen anything definitive on that. I imagine as we get closer to that date, there'll be more information, speculation, and we're watching that very closely. Recover from the flood event. There's a couple of good photographs of that flood event. That's the White Rock Weir. There's minimal contingency in Jeff's schedule, and we're trying to support Jeff and his team as much as possible with the funding. But if we have another lapse in appropriation, that's going to make it extraordinarily challenging to make schedule. If the continuing resolution funding is less, those are just a couple of other potential challenges. WIP undergoes an outage every year. We're projecting our schedule based on their projections, and if they find something that causes them to be out a little longer, then that's going to be another challenge that we face. I think that's the last slide. From an organizational standpoint, there's a lot of changes at the Department of Energy. We still have an acting field manager, Ike White. We still have an acting deputy field manager, Mike Duval. Mike was our Homeland Security, basically Safeguard and Security manager, so Mike was from here. Mr. White's from headquarters. We are hoping to get the head position at NNSA approved by Congress, and then what I would expect was then the approvals will start coming down at the local level. There's also some changes on the EM side of the House with the political appointees there. We may have some new faces to meet, and we may have some new briefings to give new senior level management in the coming months, but I look at it as all as opportunities for us to spread the great work that we're doing, get support from new folks within the department, and get new champions for the work we're doing. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I could stand for questions, or you can keep going.
Mike?
Do you predict a shortfall in funding, or is this continuing resolution going to continue for infinitum or whatever? What do you think?
What I'm planning for is continuing resolution. If we plan for the continuing resolution and we get more, that'd be great. But if we plan for more and we don't get more, then we're going to be in a jam. So Jeff and I are working very closely together, using that 173 number and with that 50 million that we already have as our milepost right now. And if we don't experience a lapse in appropriation, and if we get that, I believe we can meet the 3706 deadlines.
So then MDAH, I believe, and all that are gonna take a back seat while you move forward with the rest of your projects that are online right now. Am I correct in that assumption?
What I recall, Mike, is that the CMEs for MDAs H, L, and G are have all been submitted to the Environment Department and are under review. So I'm not certain when those decisions might come, but as we sit down with the Environment Department annually and develop our annual work plans, basically everything's on the table, and we go through that on a risk-based manner and try and pick out what we're going to accomplish in the next year, and then try and put things in the queue for out years. So that's an ongoing process.
So Pete, we went from 240 million down to 173 million. We were off for 2 weeks and we're still on schedule with a framework agreement. Good work, Jeff.
We've got a great contractor, seriously. We really do.
That's very good.
And we've got some great subcontractors also. I don't know if Jeff mentioned, but 300 contractors were furloughed, plus or minus, when we had that lapse in appropriation, and I was very fearful that we wouldn't get them all back. And I don't know what you told them, if you gave them Thanksgiving turkeys or whatever, but did a great job on getting them back.
I appreciate that hard work. Pete, is there any rumor, do you know if Mr. Huizinga is going to stick around?
I've heard in trade journals that there may be another candidate identified, but then again, I've also heard strong support for Mr. Huizinga from within the Department of Energy, so I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay. Any more questions for Pete? Thanks, Pete.